Hi, in this video we're going to convert the blood pressure app from an app that uses a single activity to an app that is composed of an activity and two fragments. I've already have the project open and I've got the blood pressure app running in the emulator here, and you should be pretty familiar with the blood pressure app by now. You should have downloaded it and looked it over and run it. And you can see that there's a single activity here. There's two Java classes. There's main activity, and there's this blood pressure model class, which essentially does the logic where we compare the input values, the systolic and diastolic blood pressure numbers. We compare them to these hard-coded values, which I got from the Merck medical reference. And it returns a category number. Now this category number is then used as an index into these two static string arrays, which would, the first array, the categories array, describes the overall category that the blood pressure numbers fall under. And the second string array has a list of follow-up recommendations for the patient. And that's what gets displayed over here in the app, under the blood pressure category and follow-up recommendation headings. All right. So back to the app, we have the two classes, and we also have a layout file, which is going to come up shortly. The layout file contains all of the fields, the widgets here that we see on the screen. What we're going to do is we're going to, there we go. We're going to create two fragment classes, which are composed of a Java fragment class and an associated layout file. Here's our current layout. What we're going to do is we're going to create an input fragment, which is going to be composed of these first 5 widgets here: the systolic input number, the diastolic second number, the diagnose button, the blood pressure category heading text view, and then this text view here, which will contain the category. That's going to be the input fragment. One of the reasons why I'm including this output line here is because when we divide this up into two fragments, we're not going to display anything in the output fragment until we get to the fragment communications video. All right. So let's begin here. I'm going to right-click on the package name just under the Java folder, and I'm going to select New, scroll down to Fragment here, and select Fragment Blank. The fragment creation wizard shows up, and I am going to give this fragment a name. I'm going to call it Input Fragment. We want the layout XML included with this, created with this, so we're going to leave that checkbox checked. We don't want to include the fragment factory methods. You would include those if you were going to pass arguments to your fragment from the activity, from the hosting activity. We're not going to include the interface callbacks. These are handy, especially for saving data, but we're not going to use them for this example. I'm going to clear that as well, and I'm going to click Finish. Now you can see that this has created a fragment class. Right here, we can see that. And if we open up the resources here and go down to Layout, we can see that an XML layout file was created. And right now this is just a standard hello world placeholder. We're going to modify that. So that's the first fragment. And the second fragment, the output fragment, let's go ahead and create that. I'm going to drag down to Fragment and select Fragment blank. I'm going to call this fragment output fragment. And set those checkboxes correctly. And we're now going to have an output fragment. Okay, these fragments currently do nothing for the time right now. And again, we have a layout file that's associated with the output fragment. Now, the way we're going to set the fragments up is on the the app is going to display two fragments at all times. When the app is in portrait mode, the fragments are going to be stacked one on top of the other. The input fragment is going to be stacked at the top, and the output fragment is going to be at the bottom. When the app is rotated into landscape mode, the input fragment is going to be at the top, and the output fragment is going to be, the input fragment is going to be on the left, and the output fragment is going to be on the right. As you can see right now, the output fragment is truncated here, and that's a problem, and fragments are going to address and correct that problem. Okay, so back to portrait mode. All right, so now that we've got our fragments created, we need to move functionality into there. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the functionality and we're going to take all the functionality that is out of that is in the main activity, the hosting activity, the activity that hosts the two fragments. And we're going to move that functionality into each of the fragments, the pertinent functionality into each of the fragments. And we're going to do the same with the layouts. We're going to move these fields out of the main activities layout and put them into the fragment layouts. And you know what? Let's do that first before we modify the code. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to copy, or rather cut, the first 5 fields here. All right, these 5. I'm going to cut those out, and I'm going to paste them into the input fragment, layout. I'm going to do that using XML. So I'm going to just select the first 5 fields, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to cut those, and then I'm going to move to the input fragment. Go to text, and I'm going to replace this placeholder field, placeholder text view. I'm going to paste the copied code into there. You'll notice that everything is jammed up at the top here. So we need to modify the layout. We need to change this from a frame layout to a linear layout. Okay. And we're going to change the orientation of the linear layout to vertical. All right. And so now when we look at the design view, we can see that we have a nice looking vertical layout, all right, which matches the original single activity version. All right. Now we're going to do the same with the output fragment. We're going to copy these last 2 fields, rather cut these last 2 fields, and paste them into the output fragment. Okay, and I'm going to change the layout once again and set its orientation. Great. And so now we have an output fragment that looks like the bottom half of the screen. Okay. Now that we've got the layouts set up, actually a couple more things we need to do here in the layout before we're done with the layouts. We're going to drag a couple of fragment tags into the main activities layout. And so if you go to the common grouping under palette, you'll see the fragment tag, and you can just select that and drag it onto the canvas there. And when you do so, you'll see this pop-up which asks us which of the fragment classes that we created is going to be associated with that fragment tag. And the top fragment is going to be input fragment, so I'm going to select that and click OK. And then I'm going to drag the second fragment below that, and I'm going to select output fragment. And so now we have two fragments on the screen, and we can see in the XML that they're associated with the fragment classes that we created, the input and the output fragment class. We also want to change the fragment IDs to something that's more comprehensible. And so I'm going to change both of these. I'm going to change both of these IDs. I'm going to change the first one to fragment input. And the second one is going to be fragment output. One other thing that we need to do is we need to make a landscape variation. And to do that, I am going to click on the orientation button here, and I'm going to drag down and select Create Landscape Variation. Okay, and it created a landscape variation. It populated it with all of these old fields, and I believe it did that because we didn't save the current modifications. But that's okay. We're just going to delete those. We're going to delete all of those. We don't want those there. We want this to display the fragments in the right orientation. So I'm going to delete those, all of those widgets. Delete those. And we'll just press delete. Okay. And we want this orientation to be horizontal, not vertical. And we're going to drag in two fragments. One, and this one's going to be input fragment, the one on the left, and the one on the right, and we're going to drag this all the way to the right here, is going to be output fragment. Now, we want these fragments to take up the entire horizontal space of this, I'm sorry, the entire vertical space of the horizontal layout. So I am going to select the first fragment here, go to the attributes, might as well change its fragment its ID to fragment input, same as the fragment tag in the portrait layout, and we want its height to be to match parent. All right, and then we're going to go to the second fragment and call this fragment output, and I'm going to make its height match parent. Notice that the layout weights are currently set to 1. If the layout weights are blank on your screen, set them to 1. That way they'll both share the horizontal screen space equally. If you don't have these set, if they don't appear by default, you'll see them scrunched over to the left or to the, yeah, you'll just see them scrunched over to the left. So make sure that layout weight for each of these is set to 1, that you've updated the fragment, the IDs properly so that they match the fragment IDs in the main, or rather in the portrait orientation. And also in land, make sure that the layout height matches the parent and the layout weight is equal to 1 for both of the widgets, for both of those, rather those fragment tags. All right, so now if you look at the text, at the XML text, you should see that you should have something that looks like this. Okay, and this is the portrait view, and that's all we really need to do for the layouts. So now we need to do something similar for the activity class. We need to move the logic from the activity class into the corresponding fragment classes. So let's start here from the top. So for the input fragment, we're going to take out the relevant fields here, and it's the first 4 fields, or 4 fields here, not 5 like in the layout, because we're not wiring up the category heading. So I'm going to cut this out, and now I'm going to go to the input fragment, and at the top of the class, I'm going to paste those widget instance variables, and Android Studio immediately asks me whether I want to include the import files, and yes, I do. I do want to import those files, so I'm going to click OK. And we've imported that. Now, if we go back to main activity, I also need to import the category instance variable. So I'm going to cut that out. That's part of the input processing. And I'm going to come back to input fragment, and I'm going to paste that in. Okay. Now, once again, back to main activity, and I'm going to take out the wiring up logic of those first 4 fields. So I'm going to select systolic, diastolic, diagnose button, and we're also including category text view in the input field. So I'm going to right-click and cut that back to input fragment, and now I'm going to go. Now that we cut these lines out of the onCreate method. In Fragments, the method that corresponds to the onCreate method is the onCreateView method. It looks a little bit differently. Looks a little bit different, and that's okay. I'll explain that in a second. So we're going to take the lines that we cut from the activity, and I'm going to paste them under this return. Now, give me a second before you question why I'm doing that. In a fragment, the layout is inflated with this inflate method call. This call returns a view, and onCreateView should return a view. So we're still going to return a view, but we're going to wire up these widgets within the fragment. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that returned line statement there, and I'm going to replace it with a view declaration. And I'm going to initialize that view with the return value from inflate. And then at the bottom of onCreateView, I'm going to return the view. Right? I've named it V. Now notice that find view by ID is highlighted as an error. And I'm going to, and the reason why is because find view by ID is a member of a view. It's not a member of a fragment, and fragment, interestingly enough, does not derive from view. So I'm going to just prefix all of the find view by IDs with the V object, the view object, and those errors go away. I'm going to do that for each of the find view by IDs. One down here at the bottom. Okay. Follow-up text is going to be in the output fragment. So we're going to comment those references out. Those lines that reference follow-up text, we're going to comment those out. Those are going to go into the output fragment. All right. Now, one other thing, if we go back to main activity, we have some code in main activity that handles device rotation, and we need to do the same in the fragment. And fortunately, fragments implement or handle device rotation similarly to activity. So all we need to really do is copy this code out and paste it into the activity or into the fragment class. So I'm going to do that with the save on save instance state override. This method is also called an input fragment, and I'm just going to paste that at the bottom here. Notice the key categories flag. We need to copy that static constant string out of the main activity and paste it into the fragment. So we'll do that as well. Okay, let's get rid of the error down there. And then one other thing is down here in the main activity, this check to see if there is a bundle. This is where we actually restore the data on device rotation, or restore the data on device rotation. And so we're going to cut that out and move that into the, I think I took an extra parentheses. Yeah, I think I did. Okay, so let's do, that. Okay, I think we're good there. And we'll come back to input fragment. And this we're going to paste down here after all of the widgets are wired up. Okay, and once again, follow-up text does not appear in the input fragment. It is part of the output fragment, so we're going to comment that line out as well. We could just as well delete those lines. Okay, so now we have the input fragment modified. We've got, so I was complaining about something here. Oh, yes, okay. We need to make one difference between activities and fragments with respect to onSave instance state is this method is declared public in the fragment as opposed to protected in the activity. So we need to change that. And that gets rid of that error. And we have modified the input fragment. Now we're going to do the same for the output fragment. We're going to copy all of the code related to the output fragment, or to the output functionality to the output fragment. So all these stuff that handles these two fields we're going to move out. So the follow-up text view, which is this text view right there, we're going to cut that out. And we're going to move that into the output fragment right at the top of the class there. It's asking me to import the text view file, and we're going to do that, text view class. And now we go back to main activity, and we're just going to, here's where we wire up the follow-up text view, and we're going to cut that out and go back to output fragment. And we need to do the same thing here that we did with the onCreate view in the input fragment. We're going to change this return instruction here, this return keyword, to a declaration of a view, name that view v, initialize it with the return value from the inflate method call. We're going to prefix find view by ID with the v dot. And then at the end of onCreate view, we're going to return the view object. And that should do it. Let's run this and see if it works. It'll take a few moments here for the app to build and the APK file to be installed on the emulator. All right, so we have a working app. We have the input files displayed, and then up here at the top in the input fragment, and then we have the output, at least the output header displayed at the bottom here. And let's see what we get here when we enter some values. And we'll make that diagnose, stage 2 hypertension. Now, nothing is appearing in the follow-up recommendation because we need to do fragment communication for that to happen. We have to communicate the category number from the input fragment to the output fragment, and we're going to do that in the third video, which follows this one. But here's a real indication whether our code works or not. When we click on the rotate button there, voila, we see that the input fragment is on the left and the recommendation fragment is on the right. It's not scrunched down at the bottom anymore. Okay, when we go back, all of our data is preserved, and we are good. We're good to go. We've implemented, or rather converted, our blood pressure app from an app that used a single activity and layout to an app that uses fragments, static layout fragments. And whenever you see a fragment tag in a layout file, that is a layout fragment. And in the next video, we're going to cover code fragments, where you can actually control fragment addition and removal and replacement strictly in code. Thanks for watching.